Hi everyone, I'm Dr.Animaction. Welcome to the latest video in my animated 90s series. Let me start by apologizing to those of you who may have gotten multiple notifications as I started posting podcast versions of my previous videos. I'll probably be putting up a couple of them every few days until I get the videos and podcasts synced up, at which point I'll post them more simultaneously. Also, thanks for the support on the new video types I put out over the past couple of weeks. The Randomated Thoughts are a fun one for me to do sometimes because I enjoy that type of speculative pondering. The Doctor's Deep Dives seem to do well too, so I'll look into throwing one of those up every week as well. I may or may not have other things in the works too, because why not? I'm enjoying myself and diversity in content is fun, right? I mean, it is for me at least, so hopefully you all come along for the ride. Speaking of which, make sure to like and subscribe if you love all things animation and animation adjacent. Oh, and there's currently a tie for the frontrunner in this week's alternate video in the Patreon poll, so unless that changes, I don't know what it's going to be. I'll be looking at releasing the alternate videos midweek, so that poll will stay up for a few more days if you want a chance to vote. Now let's get on with this new year.
Yeah, it's a bit much.
Let's see if I can remember what happened last year with all this other distracted thinking I've been doing. I seem to recall there was a metric ton of classic adaptations, a return of preschool programming, even more adult animation, and quite a few new adaptations from other screens. Plus, there was some bandwagon jumping with the decent handful of both superhero and tokusatsu series we got. Unfortunately, the majority of shows in both of those categories weren't nearly as well received as the shows that inspired them, so we'll have to see how long they, or the trend they were part of, stick around. But lastly, and happily for me, action continued to be pretty dominant in the lineup, which is putting the 90s on a really great track. It'll be fun as we go to see how that plays out for the last few years of the decade. Well, I warned you all last year that we were about to leave most of the 80s behind, and that has indeed happened, with 1987's TMNT being the only remainder from that decade. From 1990, we still had Tiny Toon Adventures, Captain Planet and the Planeteers, and Bobby's World, which had a surprisingly solid run. 91 leftovers consisted of Liquid Television, Tasmania, and the Nicktoons triumvirate of Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy, and Doug. The 92 lineup was still fairly well represented, with Batman the Animated Series, Mickey's Mouse Tracks, Donald's Quack Attack, Eek the Cat, X-Men the Animated Series, and Toonheads. An impressive 13 series from 1993 were still on the air this year, with Two Stupid Dogs, The Moxie Show, The Pink Panther, Biker Mice from Mars, The Itsy Bitsy Spider, Rocko's Modern Life, Beavis and Butthead, The Terrible Thunder Lizards, Animaniacs, Madeline, Tales from the Crypt Keeper, VeggieTales, and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. But heads up, this is the last season of the original series of that show, and even had new characters in the roles of the Red, Black, and Yellow Rangers. Going forward, we'll be seeing different versions. As for 1994, the percentage of survivors keeps going up year over year, with 31 out of 41 still on the air. That's over 75.5%. Here are the shows that made the cut, but just like last year, I'm not about to read it. Instead, I'll just tell you what didn't make it. Like I mentioned about the 80s shows, Count Duckula fell out this year, and Hanna-Barbera retired The Fantastic World. Merry Melodies, starring Bugs Bunny and Friends, ended the run it started in 1990, and The Legend of Prince Valiant was gone from 1991. The 92 lineup lost The Little Mermaid and Dog City, and a full 10 shows dropped out from 1993. These included Bonkers, The Bots Master, Cadillacs and Dinosaurs, Crow, Double Dragon, Exo Squad, Mighty Max, Problem Child, Sonic the Hedgehog, and SWAT Cats. As for 1994, the less than a quarter of those that went away were Battletech the Animated Series, The Legend of White Fang, Beethoven, Conan and the Young Warriors, JJ the Jet Plane, Jin Jin and the Panda Patrol, Mario All-Stars, Monster Force, Red Planet, which really didn't go away so much as it ended because it was a miniseries, and Skeleton Warriors. I was sorry to see some of those 93 shows go, and Monster Force from 94, but hopefully the replacements were worthwhile. I have to be honest about this new batch before we jump into it. As a large portion of them premiered in the fall of this year, they did so as I was starting out as a senior in high school. As you can probably imagine, that cut down on my cartoon watching significantly between extracurriculars, non-school related activities, and just so much detention. I got a lot of it this year. I joined the Army on the delayed entry program in October, so I had pretty much checked out of school at that point. but that's multiple stories for several different times. Let's just focus on new cartoon releases for the year. Well, similar to 94, 95 gave us another 41 new series, plus 2 significant programming events that I want to talk about. And because that video is 45 minutes long, I should stop wasting time here. Okay, let's go ahead and start with classics like we usually do, because, man, there were a ton of them this year. For this episode, I'm considering anything legacy to be classic, even if it came out in the 80s, because, well, I can. Let's start with the stuff this year that came from books. First is a series called Rupert, which came to us from the UK and was based on a comic strip by artist Mary Tortel that first appeared in the Daily Express newspaper in 1920. The show first aired over there in 1991, before coming across to our shows to appear on Nick Jr. this year. It's a series about a super smart bear that travels the world and solves mysteries with the help of his local friends in whichever country he's in at any given moment. It ran for 65 original episodes, and then continued to run in repeats here after its initial run, first on CBS Saturday mornings starting in 1999, and eventually on the Disney Channel from 2007 to 2020. Also coming to us from the UK is a show based on a series of children's books from 1977 called What a Mess. Created and written by British comedian and radio personality Frank Muir, the books were adapted into a 45-episode cartoon that followed the antics and adventures of a clumsy dog and the people in his life. The series originally aired on UK TVs for 5 episodes in 1977, before the story continued for 17 more in 1990. Rather than importing those, though, a whole new series was made by Deke for ABC, accounting for the remaining 47 episodes of the cartoon. Also being brought to the US from abroad, though across the Pacific this time instead of the Atlantic, was an adaptation of the Japanese tokusatsu series Kamen Rider Black RX, retitled for American TV to Masked Rider. I decided to put this series here as it was the only tokusatsu of the year, probably due to the fact that all 4 that had premiered over the previous couple of years were still in the air. For Masked Rider, Saban made the story about an alien prince sent to live on Earth by his grandfather as its protector. The prince, named Dex, ends up living with a surrogate family as a normal kid, but transforms into the Masked Rider when the evil forces of Count Dregon attack. The original Japanese series was the 9th in the Kamen Rider franchise to be released since its premiere in 1971, and this US version aired for 40 episodes on Fox Kids, where it was canonically tied to the US version of the Power Rangers. Kind of. Shifting our attention back to print, though, another preschool-focused cartoon was released out of Canada based on author Elsie Holmland-Minerick's children's book series, Little Bear. The books were illustrated by the creator of Where the Wild Things Are, my favorite children's book of all time, Maurice Sendak. His style was actually adapted pretty well as a cartoon by Nelvana, and the series managed 65 episodes over 5 seasons on Nickelodeon. The series was a slice of life following a group of anthropomorphic animal friends as they adventured through the forest, with each episode usually telling an age-appropriate moral of some sort. Another classic comic strip character got the animated adaptation this year with The Little Lulu Show, adapting the character from Marjorie Henderson Buell from 1935. This one was another slice of life following a group of adventurous kids, but aimed at a slightly older crowd. It aired on HBO for 52 episodes across 3 seasons, and in the first of those, the main character was voiced by comedian Tracy Ullman. This wasn't HBO's only series adapted from print media and targeted at kids this year, though. The network also aired Happily Ever After, Fairy Tales for Every Child, which was a 3-season, 39-episode anthology in which each episode presented a different classic fairy tale. The stories had a rotating cast of various celebrities providing voices over the course of its run, from Jurassic Park's Dr. Henry Wu, B.D. Wong, to rap group Salt and Peppa. Closing out the shows in this category based on printed source material is Space Strikers, a 26-episode sci-fi reinterpretation of Jules Verne's 1870 novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The series follows the adventures of Captain Nemo and his ship the Nautilus, in this version now a spacecraft, along with his diverse crew of interesting-looking alien characters as they try to stop the havoc being caused by the Master Phantom on his quest to rule the galaxy. Only 13 of the full 26 episodes aired here in the US on UPN, with the entire series getting shown in France. Let's move on to series based on classic toy lines, though. Or maybe based on 80s series based on new versions of a classic toy line, but nothing like any of its inspirational material. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, let's look at a new show that mixed animation and live action to adapt, very loosely adapt mind you, a classic toy line from 1966 that released in the UK as their version of G.I. Joe. Action Man. The toy line took the original 12-inch Joe figures and released them as a generically military-themed set in the roles of action soldier, action pilot, and action sailor, and supported that with various era-accurate uniforms from World War II and the Korean War. The cartoon had absolutely nothing to do with any of that, though, and simply repurposed the name and stuck it on a new show about a team called the Action Force, hello again, UK G.I. Joe, who were what you might call a daring, highly trained special mission force as they defend the world against Council of Doom and their evil leader, Dr. X. Yeah, what I'm trying to say is that the show was much more modern G.I. Joe than classic Action Man, and it only ran for a single 26-episode season in syndication. The other show I mentioned that was nothing like its source, which I guess actually applies to both of these now that I've said it, but it's actually another adaptation in that very same vein. That description applies as well to the series G.I. Joe Extreme, which premiered this year in syndication. Extreme is right, too. It's extremely different from any G.I. Joe that came before it. The show featured no recognizable characters and took place in a politically unstable, socially deteriorating version of the modern world, which, yeah, nope, not saying a thing. Purely fictional setting, that. Anyway, the series pitted a team of 11 new Joes with 2 other members who appeared only in the Associated Comics, none of whom were part of the classic storyline Joe team, against an evil organization that's not Cobra to stop their plans of world domination. The series lasted for 26 episodes across 2 seasons, which is surprising because I've never met a G.I. Joe fan who even remotely liked it. And as long as we're kind of talking about 80s cartoons here, let's discuss Gadget Boy and Heather, a kid-ification take on the classic Inspector Gadget from 1984. The show's about a young cyborg detective that's fairly incompetent and clumsy, and who is usually saved by his female guardian angel and her dog. Only this time, the guardian angel is the much older Heather instead of Penny, and the dog is a robotic pooch named G9 instead of Brain. Gadget Boy, however, is still voiced by Don Adams. And the villain of the show is also different, replacing Dr. Claw with the villainous Spydra, a 6-armed criminal mastermind who actually gets out of her chair and moves around, including into-camera shots that show her face. Sure, she's wearing a mask, but it's way more than that left arm we got to see of the original series villain. This show ran 52 episodes in syndication. Reaching a little further back in time, this year also gave us the Superman-Batman adventures, because why shouldn't someone else benefit from the success of Batman the Animated Series? The someone else in this instance was the USA Network, who ran this show as a new way to package old episodes of various Super Friends cartoons. I'll give it some credit, though, as it actually managed to get the Super Friends lost episodes from the 1983 season of the cartoon on the air for the first time. It didn't stop with Super Friends, though, as it also included episodes of the various versions of Superman, Batman, and Aquaman from their 1960s cartoons as well. Speaking of older 60 versions of characters, let's look at some older versions of other Hanna-Barbera characters like those shown in segments of Cartoon Network's Cartoon Planet. This was unique amongst its peers by being a single series, an anthology series, and a programming block kind of all rolled into one. It was built on the success of Space Ghost Coast to Coast and used the setting, cast, and premise of that series to create wraparound segments for classic Hanna-Barbera shorts over each hour-long episode. These wraparounds usually included some weird segment like Cooking with Brack or Nuggets of Joy from Zorak, and even included some live-action segments of the show's real-life producer, Andy Merrill, in a terrible Space Ghost costume engaging in mundane, everyday tasks. Back in the time machine, though, is we must go further to the 30s and 40s so we can see new shows featuring Looney Tunes characters. The first of these was Bugs and Daffy, which was yet another series that reran old Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies shorts. It premiered as part of the Kids WB launch lineup and ran for 130 episodes. It's the other Looney Tunes-based show from this year that most interests me, though, as it's comprised of all new material in a format that the characters have never been in before. The Sylvester and Tweety Mysteries put everyone's favorite cat and bird, along with Bulldog Hector and their owner Granny, in the roles of globe-trotting detectives. So it was like a version of Scooby-Doo mixed with Murder, She Wrote, where one of the team constantly tries to eat another member. Honestly, it was a really funny use of the characters, though, and actually made Granny into a popular figure with a pretty interesting personality. It ran for 52 episodes, also on the Kids WB. Finally, closing out this ridiculously long category is the oldest cartoon character from the year, with 1919's Felix the Cat. The character returned in the new series, The Twisted Tales of Felix the Cat, and like all versions before it, the show's a hijinky anthology of short segments about the mischievous main character and his ever-present bag of tricks. It ran for 21 episodes across 2 seasons on CBS. Geez, I feel like that classic section should have been an entire video by itself. I didn't think I'd ever finish writing it. Oh well, let's move on to cartoons adapted from more recent material out of Hollywood. This section's a little weird as it's oddly Jim Carrey heavy, with 3 of his films getting the animated treatment this year. First of those was his magical superhero character with the Mask animated series. Just like the movie, it followed mild-mannered Stanley Ipkiss and dog Milo, as Stanley goes about his life as the bearer of the mask of Loki the Trickster, which turns him into a real-life crime-fighting cartoon. Or maybe more of a cartoon, since in this context he's already a cartoon? I don't know how that works. It ran 54 episodes over 3 seasons on CBS. Oh, and the Mask's main adversary, Dr. Septimus Pretorius, no, not the one from Beyond, was voiced by none other than Space! With the show also featuring Rob Paulsen, Jim Cummings, and Frank Welker. The actor's next movie to be cartoonified, kind of as if someone had put the mask on it, was Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, which also ran for 3 seasons on CBS for the first 2 before moving to Nickelodeon for a third in 1999, racking up a total of 41 episodes. Also, just like the movies, the series followed the antics of an over-the-top, animal-loving pet detective. This one aired immediately after the Mask animated series and programming lineups and included Seth MacFarlane as one of its writers. Strangely, the 2 series actually had a crossover event for the Mask series finale. The last of the Carrey adaptations for the year was Dumb and Dumber, this time airing on ABC. It was also the last series that Hanna-Barbera ever produced for a network other than Cartoon Network. It continues to follow the misadventures of Harry and Lloyd as they drive around in the Mutt Cuts van and lasted for 13 episodes. I've never seen any of the 3, but I'll admit that none of the films struck me as franchise builders, so I'm not really worried that I missed out on anything. The last movie adaptation of the year came to us from Disney, based on their Lion King film from the previous year. Timon and Pumbaa followed the warthog and meerkat odd couple on various adventures through the jungle, guided by their Hakuna Matata philosophy. The show uses that structure to teach various life lessons over its run, which lasted for 3 seasons, totaling 85 episodes, the first 2 of which were syndicated as part of the Disney Afternoon before the show was moved to Toon Disney for the third. Video games were back again with a few adaptations this year as well. 2 of these were based on fighting games, as Street Fighter II was one of the biggest games in the arcade around this time. Not surprising, then, that Street Fighter was one of those 2 cartoons. In the series, the Street Fighters are a covert peacekeeping force under the command of Colonel Guile, usually sent to deal with threats from M. Bison and Shadaloo. Pretty much every character from the game series up to that point showed up throughout the cartoon's 26-episode run as part of USA's Cartoon Express. And although the character designs are a lot closer to their appearances in the games, and there's not a Belgian accent to be heard, the story did take some lore elements from the live-action movie. Also, in a weird twist for anyone familiar with the games, Ken steps up to be the one that beats Akuma in the series' second season finale. Street Fighter wasn't the only hyper-violent beat-each-other to a pulp game that got animated this year, though, with another much darker and more hyper-sexualized game getting the treatment as well, with Darkstalkers, which, like Street Fighter, is produced by Capcom. It's probably about my favorite fighting series from the company, just for the character designs and lore. I don't play it, as I'm absolutely terrible at fighting games, but I like the world building in it. Unfortunately, the animated series gets rid of most of that, though, adding a human named Harry Grimoire, who's supposed to be descended from Merlin, as the protagonist, making Felicia his sidekick, and changing Morrigan to a bad guy who works with big baddie Dimitri. I'm really not into that, as Morrigan and Dimitri were directly opposed to each other throughout the entire game series. But whatever. It ran for 13 episodes in syndication, and it wasn't great for fans of the game. One show that was great for fans of the game this year, though, was Earthworm Jim, which aired as part of the Kids WB. It was a slapsticky comedy series that usually involved a villain of the day trying to steal Jim's supersuit, and Jim having to deal with that in whichever nonsense fashion the writers pulled out of thin air for that episode, of which there were 23 across 2 seasons. The show was generally very true to the designs and character portrayals from the game, and had a great voice cast that included Dan Castellaneta, Jim Cummings, Jeff Bennett, the voice of Johnny Bravo, and both Babs and Buster Bunny, Charlie Adler and Kath Sosi, all directed by veteran voice and casting director Ginny McSwain. Our last show from the world of video games this year was based on a science education point-and-click adventure game from IBM of the same name called Adventures of Hyperman. The series is about an alien crime fighter called Hyperman and his canine partner Stud Puppy, who are sent to defend Earth against the evil Entrobe. The show also had a human character that helped the pair named Dr. Emma C. Squared, which was some relatively heavy-handed naming, that would provide the teachable moment in each episode. It lasted for 13 episodes on CBS. There were also several shows that came out this year that spun off of existing shows. First was the Schnookums and Meat Funny Cartoon Show, which was originally a part of Marsupilami. This one had each episode made up of 3 different segments, including not just Schnookums and Meat, but Pith Possum, Super Dynamic Possum of Tomorrow, and Tex Tinstar, the best in the West. It was Disney's painful attempt to follow in Ren and Stimpy's messy footsteps, and only lasted for 13 episodes in syndication. This is another one that I never saw, and I'm not really in any hurry to do so. The next show on my list was the Season 4 replacement for Terrible Thunder Lizards as part of the Eek-stravaganza, called Clutter. This one's about a couple of kids named Ryan and Wade Heap and their pet sentient pile of junk that they brought to life with static electricity, kind of like a less technical, much less attractive Weird Science. It's a strange concept for a strange series, and only lasted for 8 episodes as part of the larger series on Fox Kids. Next is a full-size show born from a set of shorts on Liquid Television, with Aeon Flux. Technically considered the 3rd season of the show, the series expanded from 2 to 5 minute shorts to a full 30-minute episode. Unlike the shorts, this season also has a through story running across its 10 episodes, meaning that Aeon survives each one. It also has a tendency to get somewhat freshman philosophy, or to mix politics and ideology with sexuality throughout, but it's still a pretty cool watch, visually if nothing else. These final 10 episodes ran this year on MTV. The last, and easily best, spin-off series to come out of this year, though, was born out of the insanity that is Animaniacs. Pinky and the Brain gave the best supporting characters from that series a show of their own, and we're all better for it. Each episode is a self-contained tale of a new hilarious plot by Brain to take over the world, and they're all great. Seeing Brain seamlessly interface with the rest of society in his human suit will never get old. The series ran for 65 episodes over 4 seasons on Kids WB. Next up is a blissfully short category, as there was only a single truly educational series this year, and it aired on the History Channel of all places. Once Upon a Time, The Americas, was originally a French series that told various stories of the multiple peoples and historical events in the Americas from the 1500s through the 1800s. History Channel brought over all 26 episodes of the series and aired them redubbed into English between January and March of this year. One of the things that made the series interesting was that it didn't tell a one-sided history through rose-tinted glasses, but rather told all sides of history, with both the good and bad represented fairly evenly. That's kind of a new and interesting approach, and more shows should probably look at taking it. So there are still 14 series that I have to cover for this year, and a lot of them are shows that I'd really like to speak more in depth on. That being said, I'm going to make this a 2-part video. Also, with 41 more next year, and then 50 new series in 1999, this probably won't be the last one I do this with. Look for me to put up part 2 in a week or so, and look for the alternating video around midweek. I'll also have a second deep dive coming, and maybe something else too, because I spoil you guys. Either that, or I don't really have much of a life, so I don't do anything besides this. It's one of those. Anyway, make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned, and stay tuned, as in cartoons. Later.